Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Hacking Open Source Business Podcast. Once again, I'm joined with my co-host, Avi. Avi, how you doing?
Hello, hello. Doing well. How are you, Matt?
Good, good. And today we are really happy to be joined by Brian Douglas from Open Sauce. Brian, hello.
Hello, pleasure to be here, and happy to talk about how I'm hacking open source.
Oh, we love the open source. We love it.
Yeah, I'm especially excited for this conversation because Brian is a fellow Oakland founder in the open source space. There's not a whole lot of us, so it's always good to get to chat with him, and as well as someone who's very concerned about metrics, data insights, data-driven open source development. And so I think we're going to have a lot of good stuff to get into today. Brian, maybe you can just start but with just a very high level, what is open sauce? Why did you start it? How did you come to be working on this project?
Yeah, so open source, we're making open source cooler through insights and helping folks with their open source strategy. That's a high level how I got into this. I've actually been working, just finished my tenure at GitHub 4.5 years, and my job was leading DevRel to engage with open source maintainers, figure out how they can use the platform and what features they're not using, but also what features are missing. And some of the features missing were around just getting data analytics insights into your contributors, your community, contributions and code. And there was an opportunity for me to go do this full time. So I did that starting in June of this year.
Congrats! It's such a big step to make that leap to full time. What was the moment where you decided, oh, I can go do this. I can commit myself to this project. Like, what was the?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Like a moment. I'd been bootstrapping it for a couple years while working at GitHub. I first commit happened way before GitHub, and there was like a moment where I think when I saw there's like a lot of change happening at GitHub as far as our focus and our roadmap, and how now a lot of stuff's focused around code spaces, actions, Copilot, and I still wanted to double down in open source and like community. And not that GitHub basically says they're not doing it anymore. It's just there was an opportunity for me to like really figure out what this was going to look like. It also hit like my 4 years at GitHub. I was pre-Microsoft, so as far as like fully vested, be able to walk away with a nice little nest egg. It seemed like a good opportunity. And then I randomly had a conversation with a VC friend, actually, of all people, who was trying to hire me to join one of their portfolio companies. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's cool, but actually I have an idea. I'm going to do it, pursue it like later in the year. And they're like, I gave them the idea, and they're like, oh, yeah, you probably should start now. Like, you already have an app and an idea and a network. Just go ahead and do it. And I was like, okay, sure. So started walking around Silicon Valley and asked people, my former coworkers, would you angel in this? And they said yes, and that was a catalyst.
Now, what's interesting is from your background in DevRel and community, I have talked to hundreds of different people who are in the community space, and everyone defines DevRel a little different. Yeah. Everyone has their own kind of like secret playbook, if you will, or secret sauce. Haha. Yes. And I'm curious, like, what have you seen in this space? And when you talk DevRel, what sort of DevRel activities have you seen be effective, and what have you done in the past?
Yeah. So I have my lens is I'm an outsider who is in DevRel. I'm an outsider in open source. I feel despite working at GitHub, like I still feel much like I don't have a large project attached to my name. Like speak at a bunch of open source conferences. Ironically, I just did speak at All Things Open, but besides the point, what I'm getting at, it's like my approach to DevRel has been unique where, and it's not even unique, other people are doing the same thing, is that I look to see how I can basically create more advocates of the product I'm working for, as opposed to be the face of the thing that I'm talking about. So like my original DevRel experience, I started at Netlify. I was employee number 3, started as an engineer. I loved talking about what the code I was writing. So I'd write a blog post about like something I shipped the week before or how I did something in React. And I ended up got pushed into doing DevRel. But at the end of the day, like I don't mind not being on stage. Like what I like to do is like bring more people up in the fold. So I'm constantly always looking for folks to help spread the word about some feature. And at GitHub, we did not need like more people to sign up. That was like a solved problem for the majority of the product. Like we had, I think today the number is 94 million
Oof,
users.
man, that
And
just keeps climbing.
yeah, I mean it's climbing fast because the sort of the inroads into non-US markets, that's what really is what accelerating growth.
Right.
So
Yeah,
getting more
India
people
being one of the
outside.
big ones, I think, right?
Yeah,
That they keep
India
saying
is
like
getting
India's
India was huge.
exploding. Yeah. Super cool.
Now,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's interesting that you say you've kind of viewed your job as building those advocates, because when I've talked to people about what I think how community should be measured, it is that, right? Because so many people focus on metrics that are just like, oh well, how many people are in my ecosystem, how many people are in Slack, how many GitHub stars do you have? There's a bazillion different metrics out there, but really ultimately you're right with the advocacy side of things. The number of people that actually go out and become the external advocates is super important, and that's probably the biggest measurement stick that I can think of from a successful community perspective.
Yeah, it is, and I would say like if there's no one there to like replace you, I guess it's like a lot of people, they feel like with open source like I'll be here forever, but in reality, people roll off, they move to other things, they build other projects, and that becomes their focus, and then everything else goes in maintenance mode. So like to be able to identify opportunity for people to step up and then also bring people up, that's like my bread and butter is just constantly always like trying to find a platform to put people on.
That seems like that's one of probably the hallmarks of, at least probably in your view, a great developer advocate is someone that can kind of empower others to do that role. What else do you think are kind of some of the things that you see with the very best in the space? What makes them really good at what they do in the developer advocacy world?
Yeah, I would say that it's in the developer advocacy world. Like I think there's someone who knows how to like put enough like fuel on the fire to like get a community in something or excitement started. So a lot of times it comes like, okay, there's going to be a face of somebody. So Kelsey Hightower is like somebody, ironically, who I had no idea who he was. Like again, talk about being an outsider. When I started DevRel, everyone said like, oh, you could be the next Kelsey Hightower. I was like, who's Kelsey? I don't, because I knew DevOps, but I didn't know Kubernetes like that. So anyway, but he's a good example because he like started a movement around the sort of like cloud infrastructure building, and like honestly, maybe he didn't even start it, but he's the furthest I go back to be able to understand who started talking about this publicly. But he's constantly always like he does as a big splash at a conference, but he does offer space, like from what I've learned from him and gleaned from his skill set. And yeah, so the folks who do the best, like it is basically like being able to step aside and being okay with like not always, being the face of something. Because then when you have two people talking about the same thing, now you can sort of scale into different markets and different genres or verticals and stuff like that. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the DevRel space looks minus Twitter. Maybe I don't know if it's going to go away.
Yeah, I think like there's a lot of overlap between just general developer advocacy and just like leadership broadly as well. That how well you are able to delegate, empower others, and build teams and build organizations is like it seems very crucial for both of those roles. And so you're in a very good position starting your business. I think it seems like you have a lot of those skills for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and like going back, like my first job out of college was actually I did sales. I did like tech sales, and sold networking equipment. For my last deal was for the Tennessee Titans Stadium, doing Wi-Fi in the stadium. So this is like back 2013.
Whoa.
Wi-Fi was not completely that everywhere, and so yeah, that was like what I was doing as a job, and I hated it because I didn't like the whole sales cycle and smoozing and having phone calls just to check in. And that's what, like, if you're a good salesperson, it's just like, hey, just want to talk. It's like the weirdest thing, but like, it's like, honestly, people just want to like catch up, find out how the kids are. And that's what I do. I catch up and find out how the kids are. But from that, I went to tech. I learned how to code. I got pushed more and more into like the business side at Netlify. But I didn't want to do sales. I didn't want to be a SE. I just want to be an engineer. So like the biggest compromise I made in my career was moving into DevRel as opposed to full-time engineering, because I felt like I could still code, but still have an impact on the business and scale that.
I'm curious what you think. So when a new open source project is maybe getting started or finally catching some traction, scaling, heading towards a business, when do you think is the right time to hire a developer relations developer advocate, developer relations? Do you think it's very dependent on the specific project, or do you think that there's general patterns with this of how you know when the right time is?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I have a lot of opinions around like hiring DevRel and when to hire and how early. And I would say like we came out of like a world in 2021 where people are just hiring as like the second employee or third employee, and I think that's fine. But also I feel like you might not have enough to do at that trajectory. So like if the product is still getting built and there's nothing to talk about, like I was approached by a company that's doing very successful right now, and I'll bypass the name, but basically they were like two people in an apartment in San Francisco. And they're like, hey, do you want to join us? And I was like, oh, is your product out? And I was like, no. And what's the go-to-market? It's like, oh, we're talking to enterprise. And I was like, and you want DevRel? I was like, yeah, we just want like, documentation, all this other stuff. And I was like, I'm not a doc writer. Like I can write docs, but you're not going to get the best out of my work by keeping me like on the keyboard and typing words. Like I'm much better on stage and much better on like podcasts, much better on YouTube, much better at writing code, to be quite frank. So like, I would say like you want to have some sort of public facing interaction, and you want to have like some sort of opportunity, like you at least understand what the product does. Because if you don't know, because I definitely just talked to another company who was looking to use open source, and they didn't even know how to like present the product, which is like it's a good problem, but also they're just like kind of too smart for themselves. So they have a really cool code that does cool things, but they don't know exactly what the actual thing that it should do is.
Yeah, I think right now, more than ever, everybody's so focused on capturing the mindset of the developer, right? If we can get a million developers excited about this, then they're going to adopt it. And then with a million developers, we'll make billions of dollars, right? And so like it's that kind of business model mentality that, hey, let's just think about how do we capture that market share really early, and then we'll figure out how to make money off of it later or a product later. And it's weird because some companies do miss that step where, hey, we have this person out there telling you how awesome this is. Anybody, people start to try it and they're like, yeah, but it doesn't really work in production. Like I really can't use this yet. It's cool, but I can't use it in a way that's actually useful. I've seen that before as well. So that's definitely something that I've seen in the space.
Mm-hmm. For all of the founders and founders or just executives at companies that are building open source, what do you think that group of people, like what would your advice be to those people who have never really done any DevRel themselves?
Yeah, I mean it's always fun to start, to be quite honest. Like pick your way of like how you want to talk about the product. Like a lot of folks will, like if you're like an exec, so like let's say you're already an established company and you're like, oh, let's do open source now. A lot of folks, you might have some sort of like contracted support. Maybe you're like too far away from the community to be able to get started. Like the best thing you do is get closer to the community, so that way you can start like generating some of this content through like high value, or not even high value, like highly interested parties who like want to use your thing. So the goal is like find out people who are really excited about what you're doing, and if you have no idea who that is, like figure it out quickly. Through like testing, user testing, jump into communities, Reddits, whatever. But like as a founder, I would say same thing, like the community. Like get yourself closer to a community that is interested in what you're doing, and then test the waters. Like I personally at Netlify, I was a customer a year prior to joining. So I was like customer number 8,000 something, and use the product, use it for my podcast, my blog. And then by the time they reached out to me to come and work for them when they raised their seed, they were like, oh yeah, we've been reading your blog and everything you've been deploying on Netlify, because we could see the public URLs and everything and like subscribe to your RSS. We like what you're doing and talking about. Like, do you want to come and do this here at Netlify? And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So then at Netlify, I built almost like like 900 sites because I was just constantly building new things and testing out new React frameworks and all this other stuff, and deploying and like basically pushing the product to the edge because I was just a power user. And that's the other challenge of like early engineers is like for dev tools, it's hard to get the engineers to even use your product. And if you can't get your own engineers to use a product, then like I'd question if you have the right engineers that early at the stage. But then I also would question like if you even know what, like if you're even close to product market fit, because I would very quickly hire engineers that are interested in your product to work on your product, because you get a better mindset. And then as far as hiring early DevRel, like that becomes your early DevRel. Like engineers who are already shipping code, excited about the product, that they don't mind writing a blog post or speaking on stage.
Yeah, and with the with that kind of like mentality where you hire those new engineers who are interested in your product, what have you found that works the best in terms of like the types of things that they do, the types of activities? I think everybody has assumed in the past like, oh, DevRel is just go speak at conferences, or go write tutorials, or you mentioned documentation earlier. What do you see working now better than others?
Yeah, and I would say like it's very rare to find someone that does it all. Like I kind of do most of that stuff, but if I were to take a job at a new company as an IC, I'd be underpaid by a lot. So like I would highly recommend like pick whatever you think is the most value. But at the end of the day, like pick one of them. You don't know until you start testing the waters, and you'll find it really quickly whether it works or not. So like a podcast, it's gonna take you 6 months of constant uploads to actually even know if it's working, because you can't find out after 1 or 2 episodes, as you probably know already doing a podcast.
Yeah.
But blog post, same thing. You've got to do like 12 of them. So like map out like entire content strategy for 12 posts, ship all 12, and then reap like the benefits. Because you're going to get, once people find you and they're like, oh, I'm going to read the last 2 because I found this one, at least you have a backlog. So like having a backlog of content, whether it's docs, podcasting, whatever it is, like that's going to be so much easier. Conference speaking it's a given. It's going to apply to 100 conferences, speak at 30 of them, and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, I think it's really good to mention that this is patience in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
I always like to dig in some of the specifics. So why 12?
Why 12? So the number is actually 6. And I think by the 7th, like, so our podcast, by the 7th, someone finds you, they're like, oh, I'm going to actually start from 1 and listen to all of them. And then for blog posts, like you definitely want to have more than 1 blog post up, or else it's like, oh, wow, cool blog post, bro, but would love to read more. So it's like you got to pad the numbers a bit so that it looks like you've been around for a minute. And that's kind of like, because open source, like we started the secret sauce before we started shipping code for the new product. The secret sauce of the podcast that we've been doing interviews, and Avi, you were in the first 3 of the batch, or maybe the first 7. I don't remember what number you are, but what I'm getting at is like we had the conversations about open source before we shipped the product and even like published it in October. So by the time like people found the product itself, they're going back to listen to all our 15 episodes of our conversations to find out, oh yeah, this is how they do open source. This is valuable. Maybe I should try open source.
Is some of that just because it helps to build the community? So if somebody does just see one, they go, oh, great, and then they bounce. If you have many, they'll want to come back, maybe subscribe, and just continue to listen and follow.
Yeah. It really is like someone, if you're going to invest in hitting subscribe or to add it to your podcast feed, like you're going to want this thing to actually have something come after it. Like the promise of actually future episodes. Otherwise it's like, it was a great experience, but I'm going to move on because it's not really much for me after that. And I think it's the same thing about like, we do have a product that it's only been around for 6 months because we ended up rebuilding what we've had so far that I was working on. And so like there are missing features. Like there's always going to be missing features. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe in the whole stealth startup mentality where it's like, oh, I'm just going to work in this in the silence, raise a bunch of money, and then like one day unearth like a full-on product. Like I think that works if you're working at a company and doing it like part-time on the side and you just don't want a bunch of weird interactions with your employer. But we've been working on this in public, in the open. We haven't done any sort of public announcements that here we go, open source is ready for you, because we're not ready for the influx of people to use it. But I'm a big fan of just like getting a bunch of feedback in the open, and we actually get a lot of like, I just got some harsh feedback yesterday.
It's the best. That's the best.
Yeah, and you don't get that type of feedback when you have a full polished product and people are like, not for me. But I got feedback of like, yeah, it doesn't do the right thing for me. And I was like, oh, cool. Can you tell me more? They didn't tell me more, but it's like I'm getting that feedback constantly. It's like, just not ready for me. And it's like, okay, cool. I'm making note of this, and like we'll circle back in a year.
the more the time goes, I mean, I really agree with this philosophy as well, that, building out in the open is the best way to get feedback early. It's the best way to iterate early, and it's the best way to get on the path to product market fit as soon as possible, which at the end of the day is what you're trying to do. And the longer I've had that philosophy, I just love getting that critical feedback more and more. I used to be very afraid of it. It used to extreme anxiety every time I see someone just shitting on what I made or something. And it hurts at the beginning, but I've really found that those people that they care enough to tell you these things, they give you the most useful, actionable advice. And that's really what you need is that kind of feedback. It's good to hear that, your project is, having an impact and helping people, and that's all great. And you need that to balance it out, of course. But that critical feedback can be so crucial. It was really important for Scarf, especially if you're doing something very new or radical or against the grain, of course. Yeah.
One of the great things about open source, though, right, is, there are so many passionate people who are willing to share. And I mean, some of them can be trolls, but I mean, outside of the trolls, there are some really great people who are just trying to help, but they're not afraid to share.
Yeah. And the reality too, when it comes to open source, discoverability is not really there for open source.
Right.
So if you put something, if you're I don't want to put something out there because we want to make sure we polish this or delete that or clean up some code, in reality, no one's going to notice. No one's really going to, you're going to launch the thing and no one's going to even see it for months. Unless you speak on stage or you announce it somewhere, high chance, unless you're doing that stuff, no one's going to discover it for a while.
Persistence, right? For a while, you're going to have to speak to empty rooms. Have your code, just liked by your mother, and things like that. So I think I've seen that over and over again, and that persistence does pay off over time, especially if you are active in the community. So good point.
Yeah, I continue to think that one of the really important things for any entrepreneur is just a completely psychotic amount of persistence to push the thing forward is a really good indicator of success, I think, because you'll eventually push the thing forward if you're just keeping at it forever.
Yeah, for sure.
Has there been any... So in some of this feedback that you've been getting, has there been anything that has been particularly impactful or a light bulb moment for you that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, so in the context of open source and even providing insights in open source, the most insightful thing that I've learned is that no one really knows what they want to know. So everyone has assumptions, everyone has really good, cool blog posts to write about this, and I think the Chaos Project probably does one of the best jobs on displaying and what health in open source looks like and how to get started. But at the end of the day, I talk to a lot of folks who are maintaining open source projects or want to start doing open source as a strategy of their company, but they don't really know how to get started or even the reason. So my insight is essentially it's why do you want to do this? And if you don't know why, pick one of these three reasons. And if one of these three reasons, fill one of the buckets that maybe one of your OKRs or one of the reasons why you want to have an open source project, then okay, let's get started. But if it's a struggle to figure out why we're open sourcing things, and probably just going to keep it a private repo, unless there's a really good justifiable reason.
Yes.
Have you run into any weird reasons why people wanted to open source something? Something that's just this was really strange.
Honestly, not so much, because I think a lot of folks they see the opportunity in sort of growing a community and excitement. And I would say the thing that I've been here's more secret sauce is basically open source maintainers. They're the influencers inside of our entire developer ecosystem. So if somebody creates a thing and everyone sees them at a conference talk or a KubeCon, they're oh wow, there's that guy again, or there's that gal. They're going to talk about the thing that they built and how it was successful. It's oh, amazing. Here they are again. It's very similar to celebrity culture when it comes to any pop culture and stuff like that. And at that point, actually, I forgot what the actual question was. But anyway, it's basically if you want to get that sort of influence within the developer mindset, that becomes a valuable reason to even attempt to open source anything.
Is GitHub the Instagram of the influencer space for tech people? Is that what we're saying here? Is it's like that? That's where we need to be to get that influencer, vibe.
It would be nice if it was, and I think a lot of the efforts that we had worked on while I was at GitHub was to like move back towards the social coding mantra, which is like on GitHub you can follow me on GitHub, bdugio, or actually bduggy is my GitHub, and I've got 2,000 followers. But the question is like why? Like why are people following me on GitHub? And the reason why they were following me is really because I was doing tons of GitHub action work. Like all the examples that you're probably going to Google for how to do actions in XYZ, like it ends up being some of my content and some of my repos. So people were following me for that reason. But like, am I advertising that? Like, do I have like a way to sort of showcase those repos, my action repos, to see if there's any sort of contribution insights that I could share? Yes, I can use open source for that. But on GitHub, like it could be the Instagram for developers, but honestly, I think open source might actually take that up.
Ooh, all right, that's cool.
Let's get back into open source. So tell us about the business model. How is this company making money today? How is it going to in the future? Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so how we've made money so far, and there's like, as most startup founders, there's like the opportunity to do like services up front to sort of scale your business. So we did a couple services. We did insights in the Hacktoberfest with DigitalOcean, so that was like our first bit of revenue. And it was really to build a platform that we could prove a model. So like if you want a hackathon or you want to manage a bunch of SDKs or example projects and do a hackathon or whatever, like you did in open source. So like that kind of checked the box. So then we have an end to other companies and other projects to be able to do that. But at the end of the day, like we have a platform that you can sign up for, pick repos that you want to pay attention to or organization you want to pay attention to, and get insights into contributor and contributions. So if you want contributor data based on location, like how many contributors come from Japan? Like, should we translate our docs into Japanese? Who can pick that up? Like that's a good insight to get started with, and that's actually kind of hard to sort of digest unless you're really in tune with the community. But a lot of companies and a lot of projects aren't. So we're trying to bridge that gap and sort of like make people a bit able to start doing some of those insights in the product. So it'll be a SaaS product paid per month or per year, which we'll hopefully announce towards the end of the year.
And so what is the difference in terms of, just random indie software developers that are also interested in these stats, but not necessarily willing to, or I mean, maybe they are, but I assume some of them would just want to see that for free and have these kinds of stats be open. So where do you see the line between the stats that are really just broadly useful and applicable and interesting versus the ones that a company is going to be really interested in actually paying for? Or is there a difference?
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference, and I have definitely identified the personas of folks who will pay and who won't pay, but also identify folks who we might use these maintainers to leverage our platform for free. But for companies, we would definitely have like an opportunity for them to pay. And there's like those little points become the data that we basically crawl from GitHub. It goes back till 2015. So any project, we have data back till then. But we only display the first 30 days. And the reason for that is like most people probably only want to see what's currently active, what's open, what contributions look like, and who's been active in the project for the last 30 days. Like not as valuable to see who contributed, back in 2017, but some people actually would find that valuable. So imagine you're a project and you're like, hey, turns out we got to like blow the dust off this corner or this one, whatever this random library is. Who was touching this? Now you can do get blame. That's a wonderful way to get started. But you got to go back into the history if it's not like apparent. And then you got to go back to the history of the history if it wasn't the last person to touch it, but it was like the third to last person who touched it. So be able to collect the data and be like, here are my code owners, here's the origin story of the project, and here's sort of the evolution. Let's actually reach out to some folks and see if they want to come back on board for contracting, because maybe you were originally an open source project that became a VC-backed company that's now a public company. Like maybe there's an opportunity to like invite some of the original contributors to come contract on some one-off stuff. That becomes kind of challenging unless you have somebody who's been around for 8 years and remembers everyone and has everyone's DM on whatever platform or IRC. Like it just becomes challenging if you don't already keep really good notes. And from my experience, open source, folks aren't really keeping great notes.
No, they're not. They're
We keep it in our minds. We have really sharp minds. I remember that guy that one time who did that one thing for me.
Yeah. I am increasingly taking notes myself in org mode with org Roam, which has been a really, really great tool. And I think if any folks listening have not looked at that, I'd highly recommend checking that out as a really cool note-taking
Actually, not familiar
system.
with org Roam. What is that?
So if you're familiar with, so Roam Research is where the name Roam comes
Okay.
from, which is like a company that is doing this. And the folks in the Emacs and org mode community kind of adapted this to fit on top of the org mode note-taking system. But the main idea with this is that rather than having lots of dedicated places where you put notes and having to kind of think about where everything goes, that you just take your notes day by day and link to different topics, and the structure kind of falls out naturally, which I've been really liking. It works really well for me, but it also, I don't get to code much these days, and staying in my editor helps me feel a little bit more at ease that I'm still somewhat connected these days. Yeah.
All right, note taken. There you go.
Are you still writing code for open source these days?
Yeah, I am. So the main product I've hired for folks to build it. So I'm actually directing fixing bugs. Oh, excuse me. I felt that coming. Anyway, yeah. So I'm like fixing some small stuff, and like I'm gonna add like a quick link to the dashboard for like feedback and stuff like that. So like stuff that it's kind of tedious to like have an engineer like, hey, sorry, can you stop your day to put a link on a page? Like I do that stuff, but I do a bunch of side projects still. So every Tuesday and Friday I live stream on open source,
cool.
and I've been doing that since 2020 of January, and that's actually how I was bootstrapping this product. It was actually live streaming it on Twitch. So I'd say about like 75% of the code written prior to June was actually me live streaming it on Twitch. But it's really, we have an API that actually has all this data. And I've just been building some stuff on top of the API. So like hotopensauce.pizza is the explore page. So if you want to discover like new up and coming repos, that's what I've built on stream as of recent.
That's super cool. We've been talking about doing some more streaming of that kind of stuff at Scarf, and I think it's really fun to watch people see how different people code and how they think through problems and stuff. I really like that.
Yeah. Do you find that difficult to do? Because some people find it challenging because they're like worried that they're going to type a mistake or they're going to do something silly, like And I've done a lot of live streams as well in the past for different things, but coding tends to be one thing that it's either hit or miss for some people because they're just afraid.
Yeah, I embrace the mistakes though. Like, I definitely, I make mistakes, so I want to show off like what it takes to write code. It's different when you do it live because you're also talking the entire time. But while talking, it actually helps me to like unblock myself. So I'm like, and then I'll take a break and answer a question in chat. Answer that question, I'm like, oh yeah, this is what I was doing. And then like really kind of, sometimes I get intently in the code, but I try to sort of pull myself back out and be like, oh, let me know if you have any questions while I'm typing this stuff out, blah, blah, blah. Here you go. Here's that function. And then it's a bit of mob programming where people will help me along and be like, oh yeah, you were doing this. Or they'll just copy paste like a line of code. Or I'll do a VS Code live share and people to jump in with me and like be like, oh no, write it this way. I was like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. Okay, thank you so much. So it's a skill set. It's I guess in the DevRel brain of like where I'm coming from, it's like it's like enticing for people to see you writing code, and it's like almost like prodding them to come join you in your community and have this experience together. Because it's educational for them to be able to see someone else write code and see what their quirks are, or what Git commands they use, or what editor they're using. So I enjoy it, and I also enjoy watching other people write code for the same reason.
Yeah, I think that makes you, it gives that vulnerability a little bit, and it helps
totally
connect with that audience. It's really cool when you can build that.
Yeah. I want to dig more into metrics. I'm curious. So since open source has a lot of projects that have been scanned, you've surely ingested a lot of data. Have there been any interesting insights that you've seen kind of across projects? Any commonalities that were surprising? Any outliers that were particularly surprising that you can talk about?
That's a good question. Like I've been meaning to actually start doing some data science type stuff, to start doing some end of the year, like, hey, by the way, like similar to Octaverse type of deal. I haven't actually even got that. Like we just finished the Hacktoberfest thing a couple weeks ago, and then we were heads down mode to like ship the next product. So I haven't got a chance to scrub through the data. The only thing I've done is like actually discovering spam. So spam was an issue during Hacktoberfest to prior.
Right. Yeah. Oh man. Even I got some really weird issues and pull requests.
I could say in confidence that spam has been pretty low this previous Hacktoberfest, but the spam that actually did exist, I did go and look at different profiles. So like we want to be able to like on our roadmap, it's actually our roadmap's open source, so open sauce /roadmap, and on that roadmap we have spam tooling as one of our features we want to ship to be able to identify like this person did some spam here. Good chance they did spam other places. So like where are the other places? Like what are the hot spots for spam? And we have a filter for most spammed repos as well. And yeah, it's been pretty insightful. And I even had a conversation with Strappy at their booth at Jamstack and like it was the person who was maintaining the project during Hacktoberfest. And I was like, hey, there was someone who came through and like you were the most active spam repo in like the first week of Hacktoberfest. Did you know that? I'm like, oh yeah, it was an issue. And I was like, oh yeah. Well, it turned out like I looked through one person, and it turned out they did some spam, but the spam itself was like kind of like a naive junior developer, or not even junior, but it's like new open source GitHub like user doing stuff that like wasn't really needed but kind of was needed, but like there was no issue attached to it, and they did that like in 6 different projects. So then I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like someone should just tell them, like instead of like being aggressive or gaslighting this person of like, hey, you're doing the wrong thing. It was a human being who lived I said somewhere in Europe, and I was like, if someone just told them, hey, this is not how you interact in open source, they probably would just not do it. But instead, what we do as maintainers is like we're so burnt out or passive aggressive, like you just shut it down and just like make it spam and then move on. So like it was interesting to look into that because like there's probably a story there of like, yeah, we are getting a lot of spam, but maybe if we just like educated folks and said, thanks for the spam, but here's a generic blurb that we can have in a save reply of like spam. This looks like spam. If it isn't, let us know. But here are the reasons why spam's not okay on GitHub, blah, blah, blah. There's also spam tooling on GitHub. So you can actually limit interactions with specific people. And a lot of the like actual like low quality spam that actually happens ends up being like accounts that are less than 30 days old with no avatar. So like right off the bat, if like you see something that looks fishy and there's no avatar and their account was created 30 days ago, good chances, they're probably not great.
So for those who are listening, can you maybe like give a couple examples of what spam is for a GitHub project? Because maybe some people don't really know what that is. They just might think that that's just normal.
Yeah. And this could look like typo fixes, which are like legitimate fixes, but there are some projects that's like we just can't handle. Doc's project, like, yeah, we love fixing typos, but like, could you also give us quality contributions? We call them typo hunters, is what they are. They literally just go through the project and look for typos, and like you could scan Markdown files and look for typos and make those contributions, which is like clever software. But it also is very annoying when you have 20 of those opened separately, and you have to go through that. Some other spam is like you go into like the package.json, you're like, oh, I'm going to move a line, like just flip a line. And be like, hey, fix it. It looks better. And legitimately, people will open the PR and be like, yeah, here's my change. Performance. Like that's the title of the PR. So like that's like it's like egregious, like obvious spam. And then there's like people who just don't know what they're doing. And it looks like those typo fixes or line changes or space fixing. And at the end of the day, like it's like what a linter could do for you, like people do for the project.
Right.
Oh, go ahead, Abby.
I was just gonna say, there's a line there for sure, because you do want to make sure that there's a really, really low bar for people to jump into your community and become a part of it. And I have had people submit a typo fix to my README, and then a week later they submitted like an actual enhancement contribution that was super great. And like I'm not being inundated with typo fixes for sure, but I would definitely for those listening that maybe might not do a whole lot of open source work themselves, like that still is an okay way to contribute as long as you're not 100%. Just doing that.
But it's the difference is and I talked to Miles from the Node team and also the JS Foundation, It's the like if people are doing this because they want to be genuinely be part of a community, like that's helpful. And like you have an opportunity for mentorship of like, I found this typo, but can I also like, could you show me some other stuff or like any other good first issues? Like that sort of that interest, like people will welcome with open arms. But it's like when you get the 20, like the typos fixes from like maybe 10 different people, then you're like, I don't know what's going on here. Like I could do all this work, but then like it could be like sometimes there's a like people make changes of like contraction. So like instead of won't, they'll make it will not. And then it's like, okay, I don't know if this is actually helpful. Like, did you not understand this, or like, what was it? What's the deal? And like, when you start investing time into like trying to understand, like, why all these contractions being split out into separate words, then you're like, I'm not really sure why I'm here. And then that noise it loses all the legitimate contributions.
Totally.
Yeah, that's interesting because I know that there are a lot of people who are out there who talk about, let's do your first open source contribution, and they always say like start easy, start with documentation, start with and they pick these easy low hanging fruit ones. But then I hear from people who have tried to get involved and they're like, nobody responded, nobody did anything with it, it never like went anywhere. And so there's that fine line, definitely.
Yeah, but it's the and I think I hear the same thing of folks cannot find good first issues. So like, I want to participate. There's no good first issues, and like some projects, just legitimate like Babel does not do good first issues, or I don't know if they still do. But my conversation with Henry a couple years ago was like they don't do good first issues, and the reason for that is like they don't want good first issues in the main place that it's supporting a bazillion projects. But like what they will take is contribution to the Babel plugins ecosystem. So like they and this is actually not unlike a lot of projects. Like they will divert traffic to the extension or the ecosystem and the plugins infrastructure because that's a good first place to make a contribution. It's approachable. A lot of folks get attracted like these large projects because it's like it's a nice badge of honor to say I contributed here, but like contribute and like start smaller. My other thing is like the best good first issue is the one you open. So like if you open the issue, it shows that, you've used this, like you have actually some feedback for this. Let me stop what I'm doing and let me show you what the answer is. And like that's my mantra. That's actually very similar to a lot of other maintainers. It's like someone actually cared enough to open something as opposed to like wanted to be handed something.
Switching gears a little bit, you've talked to a lot of developers in your, both from work, the secret sauce. I'm very curious, especially with the secret sauce, since there's been a lot of, people who are, either entrepreneurs or at a company that are commercializing open source. Have you had any learnings from all those discussions that, were particularly interesting to you, that were particularly valuable to you as an entrepreneur in the space?
I've had a lot of interesting. Actually, there's an episode that we tried to record a couple times, so I look forward to getting these folks on. But this is like the charm bracelet. So like it's a go CLI to make your CLI tools easier and approachable. It's like an infrastructure or a plugin ecosystem, and every single repo that they've actually. Sorry, I had to clear my throat. Probably didn't say that after I unmuted. Now you have to edit that. But every single repo that they actually open source, like it's going viral quite a bit, and they actually have a playbook of how they get virality on GitHub. And it's actually like when I take a step back and I'm like, oh yeah, this kind of makes sense. I see what you're doing here. So that's a story that I'll leave for them to share. But at the end of the day, like when it comes to getting traction in open source, sometimes it's actually not about the code. Sometimes it's actually about the approach. Like, is your project approachable? Like, is it discoverable? Does it have distribution? And like folks who have really, really good code, and I've had folks come to me and be like, hey, I know you do open source stuff. Like, how to get my project famous? And this was like conversations at GitHub as well. And like, I constantly tell people, it's like, it is a bit of marketing. Like, it is a bit of DevRel. It's like, does your README have information about your project in it? Like, do you have a description? Like, is there an easy place for people to find and ask questions? Is it safe for people to open issues? And when I say safe, like, will they get their head bitten off if they open an issue, or will they have to go somewhere else? Like, is that discoverable? And like all those steps of like someone discovering a project and validating if they should use it for their job and for their work, like once you've checked all those boxes, it helps for people to then share. Like I had a great experience. I will share your project with other people, and that's really what it comes down to. So like if it is, sometimes it is a logo, or it is like a blurb. But yeah, that not yet a sort of a recorded conversation, but I look forward to having that conversation and sharing that.
So Brian, one of the things, and we need to wrap up here, but we've been asking this for a lot of people because we're entering into the holiday season here. As someone who's in the DevRel space, plugged into the open source ecosystem, what is the must-have gift for developers and DevRel folks this year? What would you suggest that every person should have one of in this space?
One gift, huh? Yeah,
Yes.
That's a great question. It's funny because at GitHub we did a really good end of the year gift, like pretty much every year for the stars. When I talk about scaling your DevRel experience and like finding other people who are excited and like fans of your product, that's stars.github.com. And the thing that they ended up getting this year, which was a second LCD monitor, which is like it's like a USB-C monitor that you just plug into your laptop. So when you're traveling or you're upstairs, well, I say upstairs because I'm in the basement and sometimes I don't want to come all the way down here to work. So it'd be nice to have like just an extra monitor just for some extra, code coverage.
See, Avi, what did I tell you? You can never have enough screen real estate.
That's fair. We were talking about this before, where I use one monitor, so that was a very controversial.
One monitor, is it one laptop monitor? Because if it's one laptop,
no, the laptop is closed on my desk, but I have just one like fairly sizable monitor in front of me, and I just use that. And Matt is shaking his head in disapproval.
Wait, are you the Apple keyboard trackpad person too as well?
I do use the Apple trackpad, but I have a few different mechanical keyboards that I rotate through from time to time.
At least you have some sort of extensive. Okay.
Yeah, it's minimal, but it's a lot of hand-picked things that I really like. So
excellent.
Your mileage may vary, but
yeah, I guess you have the minimalist, and then you have the maximalist, who's got 17 keyboards and
Matt's got a lot of stuff here.
Center for world domination.
Excellent. Yeah, you are lit pretty well. So I don't know if that's the monitor lighting or.
Yes. I get a nice tan from everything going on here. So yes, that's just the way it is.
Excellent.
Well, Brian, thank you for coming and hanging out with us today. We do appreciate it. And make sure everybody goes out and checks out Open Sauce. And Brian has his own podcast and his own channel, which I was able to watch some of the episodes. Really high quality production, so really good stuff.
Yeah, we aim to please.
All right.
Yeah, highly recommend everyone to check it out. Brian, are there any other places where you'd recommend listeners come to view anything that you're working on?
Yeah, so while it's out and still fresh, Twitter, twitter.com/bwgo is where it's my central hub of all communication. It is the town hall right now. Everyone's there right now. So sign up to Twitter before it's gone. And then I would just highly recommend, if you already listened to the podcast, definitely check out Open Sauce. We'd love feedback. OpenSauce/feedback is our repo for feedback. And we don't think it's a tool for everyone yet because you haven't given us feedback. So definitely give us that feedback on why it's useful or why it's not useful. And then we can help, expand world domination into social coding.
And the last logistical thing to mention here is that for listeners of this podcast, we are doing an in-person meetup in Oakland on December 7th. We'll be talking open source metrics, business metrics, and just any advice for entrepreneurs in the open source space. We hope you'll join us and check out our LinkedIn. There's a LinkedIn event. Do you want to?
There is a LinkedIn event. Yes, I'll post it in the comments.
Great.
People can sign up and have some pizza and beer and listen to us drone on about, I don't know what, maybe gifts. Maybe we'll bring gifts. Should we exchange gifts? Secret Santa?
Maybe. Oh. All right.
We'll do
okay. Cool. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much.
Yes. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends. Until next time. Later.